So, as I said, Beijing is increasingly unwilling to wait until 2047 to take full control and to change this to one country, one system. And a lot of that goes back to economics and development. At the time of the handover in 1997, China needed the financial power and the growth and the all of that financial might, that economic power that this key port had. Hong Kong's economy was much better off, and having that infusion of economic power into the Chinese economy helped a lot. But in the years since then, China has grown exponentially in its own markets. There are more and more cities that are like Shanghai that have become their own economic powerhouses. The economic geography of China has shifted significantly. There's been a huge amount of growth. And so the financial might and economic power of Hong Kong is no longer as important. And so those concessions that China made 25 years ago are no longer needed as far as Beijing is concerned, because they don't need to continue to kind of play nice, for lack of a better word, because they don't need the power the same way. They no longer need to make concessions. They have power in other places. And as a result, Beijing is tightening its grip. They are placing more and more restrictions on free speech, on freedom of the press, on elections, on the freedom of movement for people in Hong Kong, all of these things. And the protests that are going on are trying to get Beijing to stop these approaches, to stop changing the rules, and to let Hong Kong be Hong Kong. So there have been protests, walks, strikes. These are sit-ins in a mall, for example. There's also been sit-ins and blockages at airports to really call attention to what the people in Hong Kong feel are human rights abuses and abuse of political power, breaking of treaties, those kinds of things. This is one of my favorite pictures from the protests from last year. Sorry for the inconvenience. Sorry that we're messing up the airport and making travel difficult, but we're fighting for our freedom. And that is exactly what is going on here. The people of Hong Kong feel like their freedom is threatened because China's changing the rules and enforcing different rules. And the people of Hong Kong largely do not want that. So last year there were elections as well. They sent a pretty clear message to Beijing that the people in Hong Kong were not going to support the Beijing backed candidates, and that people here disagreed very strongly with the limits that Beijing was trying to put on democracy, and that public support for the protests and against Beijing is not lessening. They sent a pretty clear message about that. Beijing does not like this kind of uncertainty and kind of dissent. Any sort of deviation from the official message is not looked upon favorably. And the fact that the people of Hong Kong are pushing back has been kind of increasing the pressure from Beijing. And they are continuing to tighten limits. There were several people who were recently fired just a few days ago, for example, from their elected positions. And there have also been reports of dissidents, people leading the protest who have disappeared, and other things like that. Okay. So how this all started, the kind of the flashpoint in the midst of this, where things really started to tighten and people really started to become concerned, and it looks more and more like Beijing is trying to end the special status 25 years early, actually came from a murder case that has an interesting spatial element. And what happened was there was a couple from Hong Kong who went to Taiwan for vacation. And Taiwan is an independent entity. Okay? They view themselves as separate. They have their own money. They have their own elected government. They have their own military. They view themselves as a separate country. China, the People's Republic of China, disagrees and feels that Taiwan is a breakaway republic that is part of them. Okay? And so there's strained diplomatic relationships between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China, between mainland China and Taiwan. And so there aren't any extradition agreements from Hong Kong to Taiwan, or from Taiwan to mainland China. And what is extradition? Well, extradition is when you hand someone over to another jurisdiction when they have been accused of a crime in that jurisdiction. So, say I went to Missouri, right, and I committed a job. Good grief, I committed a crime. Okay, and then I came back to Kansas to hide. Well, Missouri wants to be able to try me for what I did wrong. And so there are extradition agreements between the states that there are rules governing how I'm going to be sent back to Missouri to face my crimes. Okay, so that's extradition. Different countries have different rules about extradition. Some countries don't have any rules with particular other countries. Um, the United States has rules for many places, but there are places in the world where if you commit a crime and you go to this other country, because there's no extradition agreement, you can basically hide in that other country. Canada, for example, has extradition agreements with the United States for almost every crime, but if the person being returned would face the death penalty, Canada will not extradite that person because they are against the death penalty, for example. So different rules, different governing bodies, but this has to do with differences between countries, agreements and trade between countries. So this is really spatial. And Hong Kong and Taiwan do not have an extradition agreement because of that larger political mess between Taiwan, the Republic of China, and mainland China, the People's Republic of China. So this guy, to get back to the murder then, this guy who killed his girlfriend, he admitted that he did that while they were on vacation in Taiwan, and then he returned to Hong Kong. So he was arrested in Hong Kong. He admitted what he had done, but there weren't any rules governing him being returned to Taiwan. So he wasn't facing the consequences of what he had done. And so they started to try to come up with new rules about this. And Beijing was saying, well, okay, so if you're going to extradite people to Taiwan, that means that we're also going to want you to extradite people more to Beijing. Because remember, one country, two systems, different rules for Hong Kong. So there were different rules about where someone in the rest of China, as someone who had committed a crime, where if they were from Hong Kong, how they would be treated. And people in Hong Kong were very concerned that this would mean these changes in the extradition rules would mean that Beijing would exert more control, that they would be able to file kind of trumped up charges against people who were protesting against them, and there wouldn't be any due process. People would just be taken to other parts of China and tried for things, and that more people would disappear. Because that is one of the things that has been happening in Hong Kong. There have been a whole series, for example, of people who own bookstores who sold books that criticize Beijing. And several of them have disappeared, as well as dissidents and other people. So this all goes back to that different system, those different governing rules for Hong Kong, and the people of Hong Kong not wanting to lose those special rights and those protections. So it all goes back to this murder case where they needed to change extradition rules so this guy could face the consequences of his crimes, but that meant that Beijing was pushing to start to change other rules. And since then, Beijing has continued to crack down. Recently, just in the last few days, this article is from November 12th. The British, the EU, the United States, everyone, all of these people in the international community are condemning the way that China is cracking down on Hong Kong lawmakers and on the people. So I have uploaded several articles for you so that you can learn more about this, see how it is geographic, and see how this plays into issues of sovereignty, border issues, right? All of those patterns that we have been talking about all semester long. All right, let me know if you have questions.